Today, today we're on chapter 20, Acts chapter 20. We're approaching the end of the book of the Acts of the Apostles. We're still tracing or following the Apostle Paul throughout his third missionary journey. This is the third and last missionary journey of the Apostle Paul. So this book, this chapter has the names of many places through which the Apostle Paul travels, and there are names of individuals who accompanied him, who were his travel companions and his assistants in the work of evangelism. So we're not interested in names as such, unless they are significant. The important thing is to find principles that can be applied to life in today's world, principles that can still guide us in our Christian life. Okay, verse 1, chapter 20, verse 1 starts with after the uproar stopped. Now this links us with chapter 19. In chapter 19, we read last week that Apostle Paul was in Ephesus, and the silversmiths guild organized the riot, led by someone called Demetrius, because they were concerned that the preaching of the Apostle Paul was turning many people away from worshiping the goddess Diana, and therefore their trade would suffer. They would be hit in the pocketbook. These silversmiths, goldsmiths, they made statuettes of the goddess Diana from silver and sold it to the pilgrims. That's how they earn a living. And so they said, if through the preaching of the Apostle Paul, many more people abandon the goddess Diana, follow Christ, then their business would suffer. So they were going to organize the riot, and the Apostle Paul left Ephesus after he was released. Now he's traveling to Macedonia. From Ephesus, he's traveling to Macedonia and Greece. Macedonia is northern Greece. And then in verse 3, we're told that his plan was to sail from Greece to Syria. Syria is the main city of Syria was Antioch. That was the Apostle Paul's home church. That was the church that commissioned him to preach the gospel to the Jews and to the Gentiles. But then we're told in verse 4 that he became aware that the Jews, the non-Christian Jews, had hatched a plot to kill him. Most probably, he felt that if he got on board of a ship, there would be people on that ship who would kill him. There would be some Pharisaic Jews who would kill him because he was preaching against the law of Moses. That's how they interpreted the Apostle Paul's preaching. The Pharisees said that the Apostle Paul was preaching against their law, and they worshipped the law. The law was kind of an idol for them. So once he heard that there was a plot to kill him, he abandoned his plan. He changed his plan. He didn't abandon his plan, he changed his plan. So he decided to travel to Troas, northern Greece, and from there, from Philippi, take another ship and sail to Asia, to Ephesus and to Syria. Okay, so now we know there are two names of his traveling companions that are important, and I want to focus on them. One is Aristarchus. The name is significant. Aristarchus means he was a chief of the aristocrats. So he was a wealthy man. He was a nobleman. He was the chief, the leader of the aristocrats. So And the other name is Secundus. Secundus is the name of a slave. In those days, slaves were not called by their names. They were given a rank and they were called by their rank. The highest ranking slave was called primos, which means first. And the second ranking slave was called secundus, second. These are Latin words. Primos in Latin means first, secundus means second. So every household and every business that owned slaves. Now, the slave who had been with the family the longest of time and had served faithfully for many years, they ranked him first. They called him primos. And the second in rank was called secundus. Now, this tells us something, that aristocrats and slaves who had converted to Christianity were working together, were having fellowship together. People from the high class and people from the low class joined together in the Christian church in fellowship. So the class distinctions meant nothing. After people became Christians, they behaved like brothers. They considered one another to be as brothers and sisters. And so those class distinctions disappeared or meant nothing. Okay. Now we go to verse 6, where the Apostle Paul sails to Philippi, and he wants to be in Jerusalem before the Feast of Pentecost. The Feast of Pentecost comes 50 days after Passover. So for some reason, the Apostle Paul wanted to be in Jerusalem before or for the Feast of Pentecost. In Troas, he's still in northern Greece before sailing to Syria and to Ephesus. In Troas, the Apostle Paul meets with Christians on the first day of the week. This is the first biblical reference to Christians meeting together on the first day of the week. The first day of the week, of course, is Sunday. It says they met on the first day of the week and they broke bread, meaning they had communion. They had a communion service. There, the Apostle Paul preaches a sermon, a long sermon. He goes on preaching past midnight or until midnight. They were meeting in a 3-story building, and they were meeting in the upper room, meaning the upper level. So they were meeting on the 3rd floor of a 3-story building. And the Apostle Paul meets these Christians to bid them farewell, because the next morning he's going to set sail to Syria. So he wants to make the most of his time. He meets with these Christians. It's dark after sundown. They had lamps in the hall. And there was a young man called Eutychus. He was sitting in a window. The reason he was sitting in a window is because all seats had been taken up. The place was full, jam-packed. All the Christians had come to hear the Apostle Paul before he traveled the next day to Syria. So this young man sat in the window and he was overcome by sleep. I believe the fumes of the oil lamps were a contributing factor. The fumes emanating from the oil lamps made this young man drowsy. He was overcome by sleep and he fell off the window. He fell off the window 3 stories down, hit the ground. And the Apostle Paul goes there, embraces the young man, and he comes back to life. So when he fell, he died. And then when the Apostle Paul embraced him, he came back to life. So here is a this is a message, I believe, for pastors, not to be long preaching long sermons, puts to sleep, might cause some to fall. Anyway, it was a tragedy. This young man fell and died, but then when the Apostle Paul embraced him, he came back to life. He was brought back to life. That's the interesting part in this section. Now, verse 17, 13 through 17, tells us how he addressed. He didn't go to Ephesus. The reason he didn't go to Ephesus, it wasn't to slight the people of Ephesus, because if you went to Ephesus, it would not be a short visit. Remember, he was in a hurry. He was planning to be in Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost, and he knew he couldn't spend much time in Ephesus. Now, Ephesus was a place where he had stayed for 3 years. He had many friends, and if he went there, it would not be a short visit. So he sails by ship from Philippi to Assos to Samos to Chios. These are all small islands in the Aegean Sea. They still exist and carry the same names. There is an island called Chios, Greek island in the Aegean, another one called Samos. Then he goes to Miletus, which was very close to Ephesus. And in Miletus, he asks for the elders of the Ephesian church to come and meet him there. So the elders of the church of Ephesus, they come to Miletus, which is wasn't too far from Ephesus, and the Apostle Paul gives them his farewell address. This is his farewell address to the elders of the church of Ephesus. Now, verse 18 to 21, we read how when the Apostle Paul met with the elders of the church of Ephesus, he did not act like a celebrity. He did not expect the people to serve him. He just wanted to bid them farewell. Now, there are important things he says in this farewell address. First of all, he says he kept nothing from them that was helpful. In other words, he tells them he gave them the whole gospel. He preached to them the whole gospel. He excluded nothing. He kept nothing from them that was helpful for their salvation. And then he tells them he didn't limit his message to one race or one ethnic group. He preached the full message to Greeks and to Jews alike without distinction. Then in verses 22, 24, he starts talking about his future. He says he didn't know what would happen to him in Jerusalem. Remember, he wanted to go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was his final destination. Now he's in Miletus, close to Ephesus. And he tells them that once he reaches Jerusalem, he didn't know what would happen to him there. But then he says the Holy Spirit showed him that chains and trouble would be awaiting for him there in Jerusalem. Chains meaning imprisonment. Now, he knew that if he went to Jerusalem, he would be imprisoned, he would be tortured, he would face trouble there. But he says, I don't count my life dear to myself. He was ready to sacrifice his life for the sake of Christ. So he wasn't afraid of imprisonment. He wasn't afraid of death. He was willing to go to Jerusalem, come what may. Now, it's interesting here that he tells them he preached to them the full gospel and he was not afraid of what might happen to him in Jerusalem. I believe that the Apostle Paul wanted to go to Jerusalem because he wanted to die there. He wanted to follow Christ in every way. Christ was crucified in Jerusalem, and he wanted to die in Jerusalem. He knew trouble waited for him. He knew that he would be imprisoned, tortured, but he wanted to die in Jerusalem. He wanted his life to end in Jerusalem, the way Christ died in Jerusalem. Now, of course, that didn't happen. He went to Jerusalem, he was arrested, he was kept in prison, but because he was a Roman citizen, he appealed to Caesar. They put him on a boat from Caesarea, northern Palestine, and sent him to Rome, where it was eventually tried. He was charged with sedition, in other words, he was charged with treason. In those days, any Roman citizen who did not worship Caesar was considered a person who was rebellious. The later Caesars, beginning with Augustus, Caesar Augustus, and the ones who followed him, they declared themselves, they deified themselves. They were gods. And they expected people to pay homage to them, to sacrifice animals to them. And the Christians refused. The Christians refused to bow to any Roman Caesar. They said, we have one king, he's Jesus Christ. We only bow to Christ. We don't bow to any human being than Christ. So they were charged with treason. They were charged with disrespecting the Roman emperor, who was considered to be a god. Okay, so in Jerusalem, the Apostle Paul will read about that in the next chapter. But we know that in Jerusalem, he was arrested and imprisoned, and then he was kept there for some time and then sent to Rome, where he stood trial, and he was executed in Rome during the reign of Caesar Nero. It was during the reign of Caesar Nero that the Apostle Paul was beheaded. He wasn't crucified, he was beheaded, because according to Roman law, a Roman citizen could not be crucified. A Roman citizen could not be put to death by crucifixion. Crucifixion was reserved for rebels and for non-Roman citizens. Okay, so now one thing that caught my attention here is that Paul tells the Ephesian elders, I preach to you the whole counsel of God. I preach to you the whole gospel. Today, what do preachers preach? Do ministers today preach the whole gospel, or do they preach certain sections of the gospel that suit their fancy? Now, there are many people who are preaching ecological salvation. Their main concern is protect the environment, the ecology. Our rivers, waters are polluted, and the main emphasis is not on the salvation of the souls of sinners, just protect the environment, the ecology. Others preached about political correctness. Well, we have to be politically correct. Well, that's fine. But these things should not eclipse the gospel message. We should not preach about political correctness exclusively and leave out the presentation of the gospel. Others preach about self-esteem, self-realization. That's why there are so many self-help books. Anywhere you go, there are self-help books. These are, many of them claim they were written by dummies. In other words, you don't have to be an expert. If you are just a beginner, this book would help you to amass wealth, or to be more ambitious, or to be happy and successful, and so on. There are self-help books about any subject. I once purchased such a book that claimed to teach me how to operate a computer. So I bought one and started reading it, and then I found out the information was either too elementary, it was something that everybody knew, or it was too complicated, and you could not follow. You could not follow it because they jumped from the very simple to the very complex without the intermediary steps that you have to go through. So it wasn't very helpful. I just put it aside, and I asked my wife to help me learn the rest. So I found my wife was a better teacher than that textbook.
Yes.
Supposedly written for dummies. Anyway, there are many people today who are interested in Eastern mysticism. And there are preachers who preach about that. Eastern mysticism. It appeals to many people. And when you read those books about Eastern mysticism, it's mumbo jumbo. You know, it's a collection of things put together that you can't really understand, cannot understand anything of it. Eastern mysticism is a kind of, it's a belief in polytheism. They will tell you that the Indians and the Buddhists have a God for every Christian virtue. So kindness is a virtue. They have a God or a goddess for kindness. Honesty is a virtue. They have a God for honesty. And so forth. Love is a virtue. They have a God for love. But the main emphasis is that their religion is polytheistic. They have many, many gods. There's even a god who is called the monkey god. So I can't understand how people in this 20th century would show any interest in those Indian gods who are supposed to make you a better person. They advocate, of course, free love. Remember, there was a guru who came from India maybe 2 decades ago. He came to the United States and he established an ashram. And the word ashram is what the Indians call a commune, a religious commune. They establish a community where everyone believes like them, and so that's called an ashram. When you join an ashram, you give all your money to the guru who leads the ashram, and then they provide you with work. They tell you what to do, to work in the kitchen or to work in agriculture. And they eat common meals. They pray together, worship together, and eat common meals, but they have no money. All their money they give to the guru when they enter the ashram. And this fellow became so famous, this guru, wealthy people would go to listen to him. And what he preached was free love. That's it, free love, which meant promiscuity. And he had, I believe, I read in one place that he had billions of dollars that he collected. He had 25 Cadillac cars. And finally, the United States government deported him. He was deported to India and his commune was scattered. But he tells you how people are interested in things that appeal to sensuality. And they're not interested in the teachings of the gospel because the gospel upholds morality, high ethics, high ethical, high moral standards. Whereas this school was preaching free love. You can love anyone, you can love more than one person, and promiscuity is not sinful. It's natural for people to be promiscuous. He even said animals are promiscuous. Anyway, um, there are people who follow such rubbish things, and they devote their resources, they part with their resources, and then they end up losing not only their money, but also their eternal salvation. There is no salvation outside Jesus Christ. The Apostle Peter on the day of Pentecost preached a mighty sermon. It's recorded in Acts chapter 4, in Acts chapter 2, also in chapter 2. It says, there is only one name given among men by which we can be saved, and that is the name of Jesus Christ. You can't be saved by any other name which is circulating among men under heaven. Okay. Now, he tells the Ephesian elders in verses 26, 27 that he did not covet anyone's gold, he did not covet anyone's silver, he did not covet anyone's wealth, he did not covet anyone's clothes. And he says, with his hands, he worked to provide the basic necessities for his life. So he wasn't dependent on anyone. He didn't ask for money for himself. The one time he collected money, it was for the poor of Jerusalem, for the poor Christians of Jerusalem who were persecuted on account of their faith. And he collected that money, took it with him to Jerusalem, and gave it to the church leaders there. So he tells them he did not covet their silver and gold, he didn't covet their wealth, and he worked with his hands. He was a tent maker by trade. He had a profession or a trade. He had learned the trade. He was a learned man. He knew several foreign languages. He was highly educated, but he also had a profession. He had a trade. He knew how to make tents out of leather. And he used that trade to earn money, to cover his personal expenses. So he says, with my hands, I worked, earned enough money to cover my basic expenses, so I was not dependent on any human being. Now he tells the elders something very important. He tells them, after my departure, savage wolves would come and would not spare the flock. So he tells them, after he's gone, after his departure from Ephesus, savage wolves would attack the church and they would not spare the flock. Then he tells them about an internal attack. He says, some people from among you will arise and teach perverse things. So the church will be attacked from the outside and from the inside. There will be an external attack and internal attacks. The savage wolves are outsiders. But from within the church, there will arise some people who will start teaching perverse things. They'll start teaching perversions of the gospel. There would be false apostles. Now, dealing with savage wolves attacking the church from the outside is much easier than dealing with internal divisions. People who arise from the church, from among the believers, and they preach things that are not biblical. And we see these things happening today. The church is under attack from the outside, from unbelievers, but there are also some false teachers among the Christians who are promoting false teachings. I can mention several, but the current one is what some preachers are saying about salvation. They say the Gentiles are saved by grace through faith in Jesus Christ, but the Jews are saved by obedience to the law. This is what they're saying. There are many preachers like that who are saying this. They're saying this so that the Jews would accept them. But this is a denial of the gospel. The Apostle Paul didn't say that the Gentiles were saved one way and the Jews were saved by the law. Paul did not say that the Christians are saved by the gospel, by grace, and the Jews are saved by the law. He didn't say that. There's one method of salvation that's applied to all people, whether they're Gentile or Jew, doesn't make any difference. All people are saved by one way. There are no two ways that lead to salvation. But this is what some preachers, unfortunately, are preaching today. Okay, so he tells them, there's a benediction in this chapter. It's a beautiful benediction. Let me tell you where it is. It is in chapter 20, verse 32. Now, brothers, I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and give you an inheritance among all who are sanctified. This is a benediction. So after he met with the leaders of the Ephesian church, he discussed with them many things, including about his upcoming trip to Jerusalem and how he would be imprisoned there, tortured there. And he told them that they might not see his face again. So he was certain that he would die, he would be put to death. And at the end, he tells them that they might not see his face again. And then he knelt down and prayed with them, and it was a tearful goodbye. Everyone present there, the Ephesian elders, their eyes became tearful when they heard the Apostle Paul say that was the last time that they would see him alive, that they might not see his face again. Okay, so that's the whole chapter today. There's another verse that I want to show you, and this one is used in appeals whenever people make appeals for offering. It's blessed to give than to receive. It's in verse 35, the end of verse 35. It's more blessed to give than to receive. Of course, here the Apostle Paul is not talking about money also. He tells them how he gave them his knowledge. He shared his knowledge with them. He shared the gospel with them. He shared his life experience with them. He gave of his time and resources and knowledge. So, and he even gave his life for them, meaning that he sacrificed his personal comfort in order to teach these people the gospel truth. So he says it's blessed, it's more blessed to give than to receive. Now, when you give a gift to someone, if I decide to give a Christmas gift to someone, I'll try to think of that person's need. What does that person need now? And I buy a gift that would meet his or her specific need. When I receive a gift, sometimes I don't know what to do with it, because it may be something that I don't need or I don't like. Like I remember often I would receive a necktie, And some of those neckties are colorful, but they don't suit, and they're not suitable to, they don't match any suit that I have, so I never wear them. Or I may get a fruit cake at Christmas time, made in China. And you read the ingredients, there are 30 ingredients listed there, and those fruits are made of artificial things, not real fruit, and the color is just paint. I once purchased some bagels, blueberry bagels, without reading the ingredients on the back. When I came home, I found that those didn't taste like blueberries. Then I read the ingredients. It said the blueberries were artificial. The color blue was artificial color. So there you are. So that's why it's more blessed to give than to receive, because when you give, you know what you're giving. You're giving something that would meet a person's immediate need. When you receive something, you may not need it, or it might not help you in any way, and you end up throwing it away. So that would be a waste. So in this context, it's more blessed to give than to receive. It's not just about money, it's about giving anything. And the last verse of chapter says they wept. The Apostle Paul and the elders wept. Of course they wept when he told them that they would not see him alive again. And they parted company. Now, there are similarities between the Apostle Paul and Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ went to Jerusalem the last time to attend the feast of the Passover. And he traveled from Galilee to Jerusalem with some of his disciples. Paul traveled to Jerusalem for the Feast of Pentecost, not for the Feast of the Passover, but for the Feast of Pentecost, and he had traveling companions with him. He traveled with some of his disciples. Jesus was determined to finish his ministry. The Apostle Paul was determined to complete his ministry. Jesus said, "Father, I have completed the work you have assigned to me, or you have given me." And the Apostle Paul was determined to complete the race, the Christian race that he started. So there are some, and he wanted to go to Jerusalem to die there, to be killed there. That didn't happen. But I believe that was the reason why he wanted to go to Jerusalem, knowing that he would be imprisoned and tortured, and he hoped that he would be killed and that he would die in Jerusalem the way Jesus had died. But that didn't happen. Any questions about today's Bible study?
But Veli, I have a question. Was it his first time going to Jerusalem, or this is the second time?
No, this is the first time he went was after the Lord met him on the road to Damascus, who went to Jerusalem, met with Peter and James, the leaders of the church in Jerusalem. And the Christians there, including the church leaders, were afraid of him. They could not trust him because they knew how he had persecuted the Christians. And then Barnabas recommended him. Barnabas said, "I saw Paul debate with the Jews and boldly proclaim salvation through Jesus Christ. And through the testimony of Barnabas, he was accepted." So that was his first visit. This would be his second visit to Jerusalem. It's not the first visit.
But Veli, after the Damascus road, he went to Arabia for 2 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then he said he was, I don't know how many years later, he went to Jerusalem, and he said, "Whatever I'm speaking, it's not from the apostles. God revealed it to me. Jesus, how did Jesus reveal? When he was in the Arabia, did Jesus come and talk to him in Arabia?
He was in Arabia for 3 years.
Okay, what did Jesus come and talk to him? How did he know about this?
There is nothing. You're completely isolated. There are no people in the desert. So he lived in total isolation. He must have lived in a cave.
Okay.
But while he was in the desert, Jesus revealed to him the God. That's why he says, I did not learn the gospel from men.
Yeah.
It was revealed to me by Jesus Christ. So his understanding of the gospel was not taught by men. He did not learn it from the apostles. He learned, it came to him through a special revelation.
But he doesn't say what he did in Arabia. But one day in the Damascus Road, he heard Jesus. But then another place he said, I saw. Another place he said, I don't know, I went by, but he is not even saying about himself. He said, I don't know if it was with by flesh or my spirit. He went to the third heaven. He saw so many things, but he didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to be bragging about himself. I don't know what he saw in the third heaven.
Yeah, the vision. You know, when he talks about the thorn in the flesh.
Yeah.
And then he says, God decided not to remove it, lest I become proud on account of the visions and revelations given to me. So here he talks that he had received many visions, many revelations from God, and that the Lord gave him that thorn in the flesh so that to keep him humble, so he wouldn't be proud on account of the visions and revelations he had received.
But he didn't tell us what was the visions and revelation, like John, the apostle, he was telling it what he saw. But Paul, he didn't do.
In his epistles, you read the epistles of the Apostle Paul, 1/3 of the New Testament was written by the Apostle Paul.
Yeah, 13 books.
Apostle Paul, and there he explains his visions.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question. You said the Apostle Paul was a Roman citizen.
Yeah.
What would it take at that time for a Jew to get Roman citizenship?
Yeah.
Because it's a privilege.
Yes, yeah, not everyone could become a Roman citizen. For a non-Roman to be a Roman citizen, he had to have served the Roman government in an exceptionally good way. He must have rendered Rome a great service. And most historians say that the Apostle Paul inherited the Roman citizenship from his father.
Yeah.
That his father was a prominent man in Tarsus,
yes,
which was the leading city of Syria, which was part of the Roman Empire, and that his father, as a was a high-ranking official of the Roman Empire, and he rendered the Roman Empire such a great service that they bequeathed on him the citizenship, and Paul inherited that from his father.
But Veli, you said he wanted to go to Jerusalem to die. I disagree with you, because if he wanted to die in Jerusalem, he wouldn't have told them, oh, I'm a Roman citizen. I want to go and let Caesar judge me. He would have said, okay, if you want to crucify me, if you want to do anything, kill me. But he didn't. He said, oh, I'm a Roman citizen. That's why they stopped touching him. They sent him to Rome. You see, if he wanted to die, he wouldn't have said that.
He wanted to die,
Yeah.
and that's why he wanted to go to Jerusalem to die, because he told the Ephesian elders in his farewell address, they might not see his face again. I'm going to Jerusalem and you may not see me again.
His prophecy was wrong. He said something that was not true, because he did.
He expressed a desire, a personal desire. It wasn't a prophecy.
Yeah, but it wasn't correct. He didn't die in Jerusalem.
He was imprisoned in Jerusalem. And the reason is that I am a Roman citizen, because to stop flogging, to stop being flogged. A Roman citizen could not be flogged.
If you wanted to die, why doesn't he want a flogging? So that you will die. If you want to die, then you have to be flogged to die. How are you going to die? He didn't want to be flogged. He wanted to go to Rome. That means he didn't want to die in Jerusalem.
So we cannot
We-
figure out what he
no.
was thinking, what his plan was.
No,
Okay,
the-
I have another question.
Yeah, all
No,
these,
no, that's important.
are, as I said, peripheral things.
Yeah,
Now,
okay.
if you read Bible commentators,
Mhm.
you find that many of them say that he wished to die. That's why he went to Jerusalem, because he wished to die there. But it didn't happen like that. But many times, you wish something, it doesn't happen.
Isn't there somewhere that he wanted to go to Rome to go in front of Caesar? Isn't there in that?
Yeah.
No, there is a place
There is a
where he
place
tells
yeah.
the Christians of Rome, I wish to visit Rome.
Yes,
Yeah.
to go in
Well,
front
yeah,
of
but
Caesar.
Yeah.
but the only time he visited Rome was
in chains,
when
yeah.
in chains, yeah, when he went as a prisoner.
So it could
How-
be God's plan for him
So,
to end up in Rome. Who knows what ministry he did in Rome? Wasn't he in prison? for so
He
many
was in
years?
prison,
For
yeah.
so many years in Rome. So he had a lot of good work even to do
Yeah.
on the Rome.
Now he
Roman,
says
prison.
his imprisonment was used by God
Yeah.
to spread the gospel message among the
Gentiles.
prison guard.
Yeah.
Now, in a Roman jail, a prisoner is chained to a Roman guard. Your right hand is chained to the left hand of a Roman guard. Every 3 hours, there's another guard comes. You are chained to a different guard. And the Apostle Paul used that opportunity to preach the gospel to the guard to whom he was tied. So he says, God used my imprisonment in Rome as a means of spreading the gospel message to the prison guards. And he says the prison guards heard the gospel that way.
And his mission was to be sent. Jesus said, you're going to be, he was going to preach to the Gentiles, not the Jews. And he wanted to go to Jerusalem. That wasn't God's plan. God's plan to go to the Gentiles, to Rome, not to Jerusalem with those Jewish people.
When you read Acts chapter 20 and you read what Christian historians, commentators have written, there was no reason for him to go to Jerusalem. Why did he want to go to Jerusalem?
To take money to the poor.
Knew that chains and trouble awaited him, but he still wanted to go. So based on that, they are concluding that he went there because he wanted to die in the city where Christ died. Which is, it's logical, it makes sense. But often the winds blow against the desire of the ship. Sometimes the ships want a northerly wind and they get a southerly wind.
So we wish many things, but whatever.
Yeah,
God plans.
well, we say, there's a common saying, man proposes, God disposes. Man proposes, but God disposes.
I don't know what's that. Horut Martkan.
In Armenian, it's different. It says, Horut markans kam knastizo.
Yeah.
Men's thoughts
Desires.
or men's thoughts and desires are not God's will. Sometimes they're not God's will. Anyway, let's not cling to things that are not important. Now, how did the Apostle Paul receive his revelations? And we have to take him at his word. He says, Jesus revealed them to me. I received my knowledge of the gospel through divine revelations and visions. So to me, that's enough.
But Badveli, he's a human being. So many people at the end, Antichrist is gonna come and say, I reveal revelation. If everybody says something weird, we cannot believe that person. I received revelation. I can go to Lekaroid and come back and say, I received revelation. He's a human being. I don't trust the human beings.
He's a human being, but
He's a human being.
And so were the other apostles.
Yeah.
Now, yes, the Antichrist will come and he'll claim,
Yeah.
he'll make some bold claims, but we
Yes.
know he's the Antichrist because some of the things that he will say are contrary to the teachings of Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul never said something that contradicted the teachings of Jesus Christ. He was in full harmony. Whatever he said, whatever he wrote was in full harmony with the pronouncements of Jesus. Now, had he said something that was contrary to the teachings of Christ, then we would have reason to doubt his claims. But because what he said, what he wrote is in full harmony with the teachings of Christ, you can't accuse him of having ulterior motives.
There were other gospels, weren't there? You know, you can just touch how these
Oh.
books were selected to be part of.
Well, the other gospels came later on, like the Gospel of Thomas.
Which was not.
Have you heard of the Gospel of Thomas? It was
Yeah, it's not in the Bible.
It was discovered in Egypt. Now, it was written by Gnostics, Christian Gnostics. The teachings, if you read the Gospel of Thomas, they are Gnostic teachings.
Hmm.
And this Gospel was written in the 7th century by Gnostics. So it was not written by a disciple of Christ. It's called the Gospel of Thomas, but wasn't written by the Apostle Thomas. It was written in the 7th century. We have carbon dating. People examine the papyrus on which it's written, the ink, and they can determine the age, the century where it was written. So it was written in the 7th century AD. It wasn't written during the lifetime of Christ. There's another gospel, fake gospel, called the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. That's also, it's a forgery. It was written in the 8th century. There's the Gospel of Barnabas. Again, it's a forgery of the 11th century. So we can differentiate between truth and error very simply. If a writing claims divine origin, contains teachings that contradict the teachings of Christ, then we put it aside. We become suspicious of it. It can't be the word of God if it contradicts the teachings of Christ. We don't accept the Quran to be of a divine origin because it teaches things that contradict the teachings of Christ. The Quran says Christ was never crucified. That's a lie. So that's why we can't accept that the Quran is of a divine origin. It's a human fabrication. So we judge everything, every claim, every writing by the word of God. The word of God is the standard by which we judge preachers, theologians, books, any writing.
But really, Jesus didn't write anything. Then 20, 30 years later,